What if I told you that one of the most sacred, fundamental rules of fly fishing is actually costing you fish, especially right now, in the early spring? We've all had it drilled into our heads from day one: match the hatch. See what's flying around, tie on a fly that looks just like it, and you'll catch fish. Simple, right? But what if I told you that in cold, early spring water, that advice is a complete lie? In this video, we're going to tear that old theory apart. I promise that by the end, you'll understand exactly why that perfectly tied size 22 midge is getting ignored by every trout in the river, and what you should be throwing instead to actually get a bite. Think I'm crazy? Let me ask you this. How many times have you stood in a freezing river in March, perfectly matching the tiny bugs on the water, and gone home completely skunked? Be honest and drop a comment below. For generations, the match the hatch philosophy has been the gospel. It's the cornerstone of fly fishing literature, the first lesson taught by guides, and the entire reason most fly shops have walls filled with thousands of different patterns. The logic seems undeniable. Fish eat what is most abundant and available. If there's a blizzard hatch of blue-winged olives, the trout should be keying in on them exclusively. And in the warm, stable conditions of summer, this often holds true. It becomes a beautiful, technical game of imitation. But early spring is a different beast entirely. We carry this summer logic into the cold, high waters of March and April, and we fail. We fail because we're not thinking like a fish that has just survived a long, cold winter. We're thinking like an angler who read a book, and that's the mistake that costs us. First, let's talk about the single most important factor: water temperature. Imagine yourself waking up on a cold morning. You're slow, groggy, and you don't want to move much. That's exactly how a trout feels in 38-degree water. Its metabolism is running at a crawl. It's a cold-blooded creature, meaning its body temperature and energy level are dictated entirely by its environment. It's not the active, aggressive predator it will be in June when the water is 60 degrees. Every movement it makes burns precious calories that are hard to replace. This lethargy is the foundation for why our entire approach needs to change. We can't expect a fish that is essentially in a state of semi-hibernation to behave like an energetic summer feeder. Thinking about that cold, slow fish is the first step to unlocking the early spring puzzle. Now let's apply that slow metabolism to the match the hatch theory. The typical early spring hatches consist of tiny insects like midges or small winter stoneflies. They are, to put it bluntly, an appetizer. For a lethargic trout, the energy math just doesn't add up. Think about it from the fish's perspective. It's sitting near the bottom, conserving every ounce of energy. Does it make sense to move several feet, fighting the current, to intercept a single tiny midge that offers almost zero caloric return? The answer is a hard no. It's like asking you to run a full city block just to eat a single Tic Tac. It's a waste of energy. The fish instinctively knows this. It's waiting for a meal that is worth the effort, a meal that provides a significant energy surplus. So if they're not eating those tiny insects, what are they eating? The answer is opportunistic, high-protein meals. We need to shift our focus from what's hatching on the surface to what's been living on the bottom all winter. Think about the big picture. Large stonefly nymphs that have been growing for 1 or 2 years are starting to get active, preparing for their own emergence. Scuds and sowbugs are always crawling around in the substrate. Leeches are a year-round protein bar for fish. And most importantly, bait fish, sculpins, dace, or even smaller trout are often stunned or slowed by the cold water, making them an easy target. These are the equivalent of a big, juicy steak. These are the meals that a cold, slow trout will absolutely move for, because the energy gain is massive compared to the energy spent. This brings us to the concept of opportunistic feeding versus selective feeding. Selective feeding is what Match the Hatch is all about. The fish are dialed in on one specific food source, and they'll ignore everything else. This happens when that food source is so overwhelmingly abundant that it's the easiest way to feed. But in early spring, hatches are often sparse and sporadic. There isn't that overwhelming abundance. Therefore, the fish remains in an opportunistic mode. It's not looking for one specific thing. It's looking for any easy, substantial meal that comes its way. It's a survival mindset. It's like you walking through a grocery store. In summer, you have a specific shopping list. In early spring, that fish is just looking for the free sample table with the biggest portions. Let's put this into a real-world fishing scenario. You're on the river. It's a cold, gray day in late March. You see a few tiny, dark insects on the water. The old wisdom tells you to tie on a size 20 Griffith's gnat. You spend 15 minutes with frozen fingers tying that tiny fly onto your 6X tippet. You make a dozen perfect drag-free drifts over a promising seam. Nothing. Not a look, not a refusal, just complete indifference. The fish you know are there might as well be made of stone. This is the moment of frustration where most anglers either give up or just keep trying the same failed tactic. They're convinced the problem is their drift or the fly pattern, not the entire underlying theory they are following. The fish just don't care about that fly. Now, let's change the approach in that same scenario. You see those tiny flies and you ignore them. You recognize them as a false signal. Instead of going smaller, you go bigger, much bigger. You tie on a size 8, heavily weighted black stonefly nymph. Or maybe a big, ugly, rubber-legged pattern that doesn't look like anything specific, what some anglers call a junk fly. You're no longer trying to imitate a delicate insect. You're now presenting the idea of a substantial, clumsy, easy-to-catch meal. You're presenting a mouthful of protein that is worth moving for. This fly gets down deep, right in the fish's face, where it's holding and conserving energy. You are changing the question from, will you sip this tiny morsel, to, can you ignore this big, easy meal? And we can take it even one step further. Forget nymphs for a second. Let's talk about streamers. In early spring, a properly fished streamer isn't just imitating a bait fish. It's triggering a predatory response that has nothing to do with gentle feeding. Think about a big, articulated streamer swung or stripped through a deep pool. It's not just food. It's an intruder. It's a competitor. For a large, dominant trout that has been cooped up all winter, this can trigger a reaction of pure aggression. The fish isn't striking because it's precisely identified it as a specific species of minnow. It's striking because its brain is hardwired to attack, to defend its territory, or to eliminate competition. It's a primal, instinctual bite that Match the Hatch will never provoke. Consider the visibility and water conditions of early spring. The water is often slightly high and discolored from the initial snowmelt. In these conditions, a tiny size 18 fly is practically invisible. A trout isn't going to expend energy searching for something it can't even see. A larger nymph or a streamer, on the other hand, pushes more water. It creates a bigger silhouette. It has movement and flash that can be detected from farther away, appealing to the fish's lateral line as much as its eyesight. You have to give the fish something it can actually find without having to work for it. It's like waving a giant sign in a crowded room versus whispering in the corner. You need to be the sign. The lie of Match the Hatch in spring is that it presumes the fish are looking up. For the most part, they are not. Their metabolism is slow, and they're conserving energy by holding in slower, deeper water, often right on the bottom. The most effective way to fish is to get your fly down to their level. This is why heavy nymphing rigs or slow, deep streamer presentations are so deadly. You have to put the meal right on their dinner plate. Expecting a fish to rise through 5 feet of cold, heavy current to sip a tiny, dry fly is, in most cases, a fantasy. It's the equivalent of asking someone in bed with the flu to climb a ladder for a piece of candy. It's just not going to happen. You have to bring the food to them. Let's dissect the psychology of presentation. Matching the Hatch is about trickery and deception. You're trying to create a perfect imitation to fool a discerning fish. but fishing a big nymph or streamer in the spring is about provocation and opportunity. You're not trying to be subtle. You're trying to present something that is so obviously an easy meal that the fish's instinct takes over. Your fly should look vulnerable, a jighead nymph that tumbles along the bottom, a streamer with a wounded, erratic action. You are imitating weakness. A weak, easy target is something a predator, even a lethargic one, is programmed to take advantage of. It's a low-risk, high-reward proposition for the fish. Another critical point is that not all fish in the river are the same. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that a few smaller, younger fish are indeed rising to those tiny midges. They have a faster metabolism and need to eat more frequently. But are those the fish you're really after? The larger, more dominant trophy-class fish are much smarter about their energy expenditure. They will almost always ignore that small stuff, waiting for a more substantial meal to come along. So by focusing on matching the hatch, you might occasionally pick up a small fish, but you are completely ignoring the presentation that would appeal to the biggest fish in the river. You're fishing for the guppies while the sharks are looking for steak. Think about the timeline of the season. The match the hatch principle becomes more and more valid as the water warms up. When we get into late spring and early summer, the water temperature rises, the fish's metabolism speeds up, and major insect hatches become the primary food source. This is when you'll see those classic head and tail rises in big numbers. This is when being able to distinguish between 3 different types of mayflies makes you a hero. But applying that late-season logic to the early season is like showing up to a snowball fight in a swimsuit. You're using the right strategy, but at completely the wrong time. The context is everything, and the context of early spring is cold. So, what does this mean for your fly box? It means you should simplify. Instead of carrying 6 different boxes of tiny, specific imitations, you can get by with 1 or 2 boxes filled with versatile, suggestive patterns. You need a selection of heavy stonefly nymphs in various sizes and colors. You need some attractor nymphs, like squirmy worms or mop flies. The patterns that purists hate, but that fish absolutely crush. And you need a good assortment of streamers. Some light, some dark, some articulated, some with flash. You're building a toolbox of triggers, not a library of imitations. This simplifies your decision-making on the water and lets you focus more on presentation than on pattern. Let's talk about presentation with these anti-hatch flies. With a big nymph rig, you want to get a solid tumbling drift right along the bottom. Use enough weight to feel your flies occasionally ticking the rocks. You want to lead your flies through a run, letting them swing at the end of the drift. This swing often triggers a strike as the fly begins to rise off the bottom, imitating an emerging insect or a fleeing creature. It's an aggressive, active presentation. You are covering water and showing your fly to as many fish as possible, forcing them to make a decision. This is a far cry from the delicate, precise upstream dry fly cast. It's a different game with a different set of rules. And for streamers, the key is variety. Don't just cast and strip at the same speed. In cold water, a slow, deep swing can be deadly. Cast across the current, throw a mend upstream, and let the fly swing slowly through the deepest part of the run. Other times, an erratic strip and pause retrieve works best. Imitating a wounded baitfish, the pause is critical. It gives that cold, slow trout a chance to commit. The fish might follow the fly for a long time before deciding to strike, and that pause is often the trigger. The important thing is that you're making the fish react, not just gently offering it a meal. You are forcing the issue, and in early spring, that's what gets you bites. There's also a confidence factor at play. When you're fishing a tiny dry fly with no success, your confidence plummets. Every cast feels hopeless. But when you tie on a big, ugly streamer that you have faith in, you fish it differently. You fish with purpose. You expect a strike on every cast. You're more focused on your retrieve, your swing, and feeling for that subtle take. This confidence translates into better fishing. You're no longer just going through the motions of a theory you were told to follow. You're actively hunting, using a tactic that makes sense for the conditions. It completely changes your mindset on the water, from passive and hopeful to active and predatory. Let's be clear, this doesn't mean that match the hatch is always a lie. It is a critically important concept for much of the fishing season. I am specifically talking about the unique conditions of early spring, when the water is cold and the fish are not yet in their prime feeding mode. The mistake is treating it as a universal year-round law. Great anglers are not the ones who follow one rule blindly. They are the ones who understand when the rules need to be broken. Recognizing that early spring demands a different approach is a sign of an experienced and adaptable fisherman. It's about having more than one tool in your toolbox and knowing which one to use for the job at hand. Think of the anecdotal evidence. Talk to any seasoned, successful cold water angler. Ask them what their top 3 flies are for March. I can almost guarantee you they won't list 3 different size 24 midge patterns. They will tell you about a specific woolly bugger, a big girdle bug, or a custom-tied sculpin pattern. They've learned through thousands of hours on the water that big, suggestive patterns that get deep are what consistently produce results when it's cold. They abandoned the match the hatch dogma for early spring long ago because experience proved it wrong. They are fishing with what works, not with what the books say should work. And that's a lesson we all need to learn. This is a liberating idea. It means you can stop stressing about having the exact perfect imitation of an insect you can barely see. You can stop spending hours at the tying bench creating hyper-realistic flies that the fish don't care about. Instead, you can focus on the fundamentals, getting your fly in the right zone, giving it the right action, and reading the water. It shifts the focus from the fly itself to the presentation and the strategy. It simplifies the game in a way that makes it both more enjoyable and far more effective. You're no longer an insect collector. You're a predator, just like the fish you're trying to catch. It's a powerful shift in perspective. So, the next time you're gearing up for an early spring trip, I want you to conduct an experiment. Leave the box of tiny dry flies at home. Seriously, just leave it. Rig up with a big stonefly and a flashy attractor nymph. Dedicate another rod to a dark-colored streamer. Fish these setups hard for the entire day. Fish them deep, fish them with confidence, and cover water. I am willing to bet that you will not only have a more engaging day on the water, but you will also connect with more, and likely larger, fish than you would have by painstakingly trying to match a hatch that the fish are actively ignoring. Break the rule. The results will speak for themselves and will probably change your approach to cold water fishing forever. So, let's put it all together. Is match the hatch a complete lie in early spring? For all practical purposes, yes. The theory breaks down when faced with the hard reality of a fish's slow, cold water metabolism. They aren't looking for tiny, energy-deficient snacks. They need a big, easy, high-protein meal that makes the effort of moving worthwhile. The real turning point, the aha moment, is when you stop trying to match the insect and start trying to match the metabolism of the fish. You're not feeding a picky eater in a 5-star restaurant. You are trying to trigger a reaction from a groggy, opportunistic heavyweight. This shift in thinking will completely change what's in your fly box and how you approach a cold river. You'll stop chasing ghosts on the surface and start targeting the actual feeding behavior of the fish. Thank you so much for watching and for being willing to challenge the old school rules with me. If this video gave you a new perspective, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe for more content that cuts through the noise. Now, for the real discussion. What is your absolute go-to, #1 anti-match the hatch fly for early spring? Let's see those secret weapons in the comments below.